Welcome back. I didn't have a voice on Saturday, so I had to wait a few days for it to come back. It's still not great, but it will do. And in the interim, I had this catastrophe. I got up and tried to pull up this document, and it was gone. It's not in the trash. It's not in the finder. It's just, it was gone. I'm sure it's there somewhere. I just don't know how to find it. So I spent yesterday listening to the previous YouTube videos and inputting it back in. So we are ready to go today. The one good thing about doing this is that you get to see the process, the writing process. One bad thing about this is that you get to see the writing process. We are not at a final draft here. So between last week and this week, I got thinking, and the order didn't quite work for me, and so I mixed up the order of the 3 letters I read last week, and I think it works better. And we'll see what you think of today's letter. I thought we should bring more Nora in here. So this letter is from Nora to Corinna, and here we are, part 3. October 22nd, 1792, Montague Hall, Arpinge, Folkestone. Dear Corinna, I have so much I need to say in response to your letter, but first I must tell you what happened yesterday. The day of foraging was successful, but you were right. I did slip away and sneak into Remington Keep. I never was so frightened in my life but wait, I should tell the story in order. Many of the older children at the charity school obtained work in the harvest, so we had a smaller group of 15. We started early yesterday morning after the children finished their toast and tea. The vicar offered the use of his carriage and came along to help shepherd the children. I had my cart, and Mr. Caney drove down into the village to help us bring the children up to the keep. The older children each had a basket or bag to bring home their harvest in. The morning was cool while we harvested by the hedges. As the day warmed, we moved into the woods. For every berry or apple that went into the bag or basket, 2 went into the children's mouth, but we didn't scold. It was a rare day of freedom, and we all felt the joy of fresh air and plentiful fruit and greens. After breakfast, the teachers, the vicar, and Mr. Caney led the children to the pond. Mr. Caney thoughtfully borrowed a few small skiffs so the older children could pull out onto the water. I made some poor excuse that I wanted to tend to the horses and slipped away. Only the choleric butler and the ineffectual housekeeper would be in the keep. I was sure I could avoid them. So I made my way through the woods, keeping out of sight of the windows, and came finally to the side entrance. It was blessedly unlocked, and not a soul was near. I was sorely tempted to open windows as I walked through the house, but I left everything as it was, even the dust on every surface I passed. I did consider for a full minute writing a little note to the housekeeper in the dust on a table in the back parlor. Clean me. Sincerely, your keep ghost. As I looked into every room, I made a list in my mind of the cleaning and polishing for my imaginary staff, and then I refurbished each room to my taste. It is a grand historic pile, somber and solid, made of our own Kentish ragstone. I could see it in my mind restored to its former glory. I explored to my heart's content everywhere except the servants' quarters and the kitchen, and didn't see a soul. That is, until I decided to climb the stairs and walk down the gallery to view the family portraits. I was strolling down the hall, moving from the oldest paintings to the more recent, causing no stir. I turned a corner and screamed when I collided with a monster of a man who was lurking there. Before I took another breath, he pulled me against him, twisting me until my back was pressed to his front, and he put his hand over my mouth. I lifted my head and bit him. He swore on a breath, but pushed harder against my face and pulled me into the shadows. I couldn't breathe. I kicked and struggled, but he held me firmly. His unyielding arm was hard as iron under my ribs. Just when I started to see stars, the pressure on my face let up a little. I gulped in the air and fought dizziness. He whispered, "Unless you want Mr. Willis to find us, you won't scream again, ma petite." I stiffened, then nodded, and he let me go. I didn't think. He had frightened me so much, I just turned and kicked his shin. It probably hurt my foot more than his leg, but it wasn't enough, so I kicked him again and hit him on his arm for good measure, but I did it without making a sound. In a second, his arm was banded around me again, but this time I faced him. I gasped and leaned back as far as his grip would allow. He took my chin and held it tight when I tried to turn away. He hummed and breathed the words, "You're dressed too à la mode to be une servante. I can think of only one other reason for you to be here." He lifted my face to the meager light coming from a window at the end of the hall. Well, no one ever questioned Sir Alfred's taste in women. Something in his eyes made me quiver, something behind the derision and regret. I was puzzling over it, so I was slow to understand his next words. "He's quite a bit older than you, almost old enough to be your grandfather. If you hope he'll be generous, I can tell you he won't. The Baron doesn't take care of his legal responsibilities. He's even less likely to compensate you for your time and services." He caught my wrist before my slap landed. "I wouldn't if I were you, little fox. You won't like what happens next." "I am not." I could feel the heat rise on my face. "Not Sir Alfred's." I couldn't finish. His hand loosened and his thumb slid over my racing pulse. His voice deepened. "No? That's something anyway. So who are you, ma belle?" I'm sure I looked like a landed fish. How is one to respond to such a forward man? I'd already tried and failed to slap him, and I refused to faint. He smirked. "Are you come to the keep on a Sunday afternoon to try your hand at a little burglary? What did you hope to find?" My fear turned to anger, and I hissed, "How dare you? It's you who doesn't belong here, in the keep or in England." I stamped my foot. "Unhand me and leave immediately, and I won't report you to the authorities." He did drop his hands, but only because he was laughing so hard. After a minute of that laughter, holding it in so he wouldn't make a noise, he leaned down and put his hands on his knees, still shaking. I folded my arms and waited for the horrible man to finish his mirth. Finally, he stood straight, and for the first time I really looked at him. He wasn't as large as I'd thought, tall certainly, but lithe in build. Some Bible verses came to mind, those lines in Ezekiel about the seal of perfection full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. For this man had a dark and savage allure. His black hair was tied back with a leather strap, and his eyes, almost as dark as his hair, sparkled with... there's some question marks there. I'm working on that word. His thin, almost austere face was a study of honed lines and interesting shadows. It took a moment for me to remember that Ezekiel had been talking about the devil, which I assured myself was apt. While many would think he's handsome, his behavior to me was abominable. As I studied him, his eyes roamed over my face. A small smile softened his full lips. "I do not think you will report me. How would you explain your own trespass to the authorities?" I had no quick answer. Although I've thought of many since then, why does it always work that way? When I said nothing, he cocked his head and listened. "We have both stayed longer than is safe." Then he took my arm. "Come, mademoiselle, I will escort you safely out of the keep." And he did just that. Silent as a cat, he led me through the empty halls. Questions crowded my mind, but I could not speak. We slipped out the same door I had entered. In the daylight, I turned to face him and saw that he was younger than I thought. I would guess not much older than we are. His good looks were a little less sinister, but still arresting. He stepped closer and whispered, "It was an unexpected pleasure to bump into you." He bowed deeply, took my hand, and kissed my fingers. My breath caught, and he grinned. Then he turned and loped off into the woods. I did not dare follow. He was right. I had already been gone from the children too long. By the time I returned, our party had moved into the sun again and were playing a rigorous game of blind man's bluff. I smiled and laughed with the others, but every one of the stranger's words and looks turned over in my mind. "Corinna, I think he must be one of the French émigrés that come in greater number every week. He spoke like a gentleman, if you ignored his words and bold looks. Considering his trespass in the keep, he must have been stripped of everything when he left France. Or maybe he's a French smuggler or spy. Either way, I will never see him again, and I don't even know his name. I will never have another adventure like that. But that is enough of that. Anything else I say would be mere speculation. Instead, I will talk about your life and letter. Sir Julian sounds interesting. Tell me about him. And don't let me hear another word comparing your new friend's looks to what you see as a lack in yours. You are exceedingly beautiful. I don't care if Miss Philippa is dark and petite with doe-like eyes, and if Lady Delia is the British blonde ideal. If I were a man, I would admire your large, expressive gray eyes and your thick, annoyingly well-behaved chestnut hair, and what I wouldn't give for your willowy, graceful form. While men as a group are stupid, as individuals, they do occasionally use their heads for something other than to hold up their hats. I am confident you will have your share of admirers if you will only try something new. Last year, you worked so hard to obey every societal stricture. That didn't work. This year, you should try if you can have some fun and a little adventure. Even if you don't make a splendid match, at least you will enjoy the season. I am relieved to hear you received your Lord Wycliffe's letters without being discovered. As to the content of his missive, if you are pleased, I am pleased. He sounds a little stiff and boring to me, but I haven't your bent for scholarship. Mamma calls, so I must go. More later. Your confused Nora. We're just doing one this week because I had to take the time to re-enter the whole story so far. And let me tell you another change I made. I kind of agreed with Nora that Lord Wycliffe seemed a little dry. As interesting as the research was to me, I just felt like it was a little bit of an info dump. So I went back and I had him explain that he no longer could leave the house without a knife, and I had him set upon by some desperate revolutionaries, and so we made him just a little more debonair. If he's going to be one of the main male characters, he needs to be a little more exciting. Anyway, tell me what you think about Nora's adventure and what should happen next in her story, and Corinna's as well. Thanks for coming.